Señoras vicepresidentas del Parlamento Europeo,
Vice Presidents of the European Parliament, Ambassador of the French Republic in Spain, Vice Presidents of the New Europe Group in the European Parliament, Spanish spokesperson of Ciudadanos, Secretary General of Ciudadanos, Deputy spokesperson of Ciudadanos in the Spanish Parliament, members of the Executive Committee of Ciudadanos, dear friends. As President of New Economy Forum, I want to wish you a very warm welcome to a new event of the Europa Forum, organized thanks to the sponsorship of Solaria Energy Company and CISA Health Insurance Company, on behalf of whose chairman, Enrique Diaz-Teixeira and Francisco Bora, we extend our warmest greetings. Today we are honored to have the President of Renew Europe, third political group in the European Parliament, the Liberal group. He's going to be introduced by Adrian Vasquez, Secretary General of Ciudadanos and President of the Legal Matters Commission of the Euro Chamber. Mr. Vasquez, you have the floor. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to begin by thanking José Luis Rodriguez and the New Economy Forum and for inviting us and for welcoming the presidency of Renew Europe. Apart from my colleagues in my delegation, we have Jordi Cañas, Mira Porcheva, Soraya Rodriguez, Susana Solis, our national spokesperson, and we also have a large group of European leaders who are setting the roadmap for institutions this Parliament. We have two vice presidents of the Euro Chamber. Then we have other people such as Fabienne Keller from France, the former mayoress of Strasbourg, Iker Katsas from Hungary, and my colleague from Italy, Nicola Danti. So, as you can see, not all countries are represented, but I think that the large countries of the European Union are very well represented here, and we feel very proud that this is so. But, of course, I should mention the Secretary General of Renaissance, which is the party of President Macron, which I'm going to be introducing in a minute. It would be impossible to introduce Stéphane without mentioning the meaning, the import that the project of President Macron has had for Europe and for the whole of the liberal family. This has been a political project that showed that it was not necessary to choose between freedom or trade and social justice. They showed that it was possible to have a project for a country that was not really dependent on ideology attracting civil society. They showed that it was possible to have an ambitious but sensible project, which was patriotic, because of course the French are very patriotic, and a European project, a cross-cutting project for all. And that is what our family represents, not only in Europe, but in all the member states. This path taken by Mr. Macron has been very inspiring for Ciudadanos, as Ciudadanos was for En Marche from its beginning. We had many meetings at the beginning to support one another because we are two very similar parties, and this was essential for the European liberal family to become what we call Renew Europe today, which is the third political force in Europe. And for the first time in the history of the European Parliament, majorities are not just PP or Socialist Party. Of course, in Europe, the PP and the Socialist Party have always voted together. But now it is the Liberal Party, it is Renew Europe that really decides European policy. This is what we call kingmakers. And this is something that the new Ciudadanos aspires to. But if there is something that characterizes Stéphane, is his courage to build a transformative and modernizing project for our society. You just have to look at the courageous debate that has been undertaken by the French government, which is the reform of the pension system. This is a debate which only Ciudadanos in Spain, led by Maria Muñoz, we are the only party in Europe that is brave enough to say that the pension system in Spain is unsustainable. And, you know, if we didn't say this, we would be cheating our young people. And Renew is also brave because we have led the defense of the rule of law. We have introduced conditionality on European funds, conditionality to the fulfillment of the rule of law. And this is a debate which is also happening in Spain. But in Spain, we're stuck. We are going backwards. For example, the Council of the Judiciary in Spain, you know, is at a deadlock. There is no will to reform the system. And PP and Socialist Party are playing with fire. And I will just say a few more things about Stéphane, because to conduct these brave policies, you need brave people, and Stéphane is very brave. He's a tranquil leader. I remember in 2019 we were having conversations at the Élysée, and I immediately realized that Stéphane was an extremely talented person, and he is really adamant that agreements should be possible. And I can assure you that keeping the liberal group united in Europe requires a very strong will. He's now Secretary General of Renaissance, and he's going to talk to us about the big challenges we're going to be faced with. The war on the Ukraine, the energy transition, and the worrying situation of the middle classes, you know, which is particularly sad in Spain. Stéphane, welcome, and we are looking forward to listening to you. Thank you.
Señor Séjourné, buenos días. ¿Cómo está?
Good morning. How are you and the rest of your colleagues in the European Renew Europe group? You're having meetings these 2 days in Madrid. You're going to be discussing your goals, your strategy, and strengthening the collaboration between you. Because, you know, as you know, the Ciudadanos Party, since its refounding, is really facing many challenges. What is the agenda for this meeting of Renew Europe, and what lines or what policies bring you together with Ciudadanos? Thank you very much, Adrian. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to try and speak Spanish. But in the first place, I want to thank you very much for inviting me to this session. It is always a pleasure for me to visit Spain and also to interact with my colleagues of the Renew Europe parliamentary group in the European Parliament. It's always a pleasure to meet with my colleagues from Ciudadanos in Spain. Now, to provide some context, before I answer your question, first of all, I am the president of the third parliamentary group in Europe. We are a liberal group which which marked a rift in bipartidanism in the European Parliament. We are the ones that really make decisions. We are what we call in Brussels the kingmakers. We are the ones who decide at the center, because the parliamentary majority needs 3 groups to make up a majority. There's the Liberals, ourselves, the Socialists, and the Popular Party, which is the right-wing party in Europe. We Renew Europe, 99% of us stay at the majority of the European Parliament. So when we decide not to vote, no vote is made. And when we decide to vote, everybody votes. So this is a huge responsibility on our shoulders. It is a huge responsibility that our colleagues from Ciudadanos also have in Spain. And as you know, in these first 23 years of in this first 23 years of the 21st century were a succession of crises. We had the financial crisis of 2008, the COVID pandemic, and then the war on the Ukraine. And this also gave us many opportunities in the last 4 years in the European Parliament, because, of course, when there is a crisis, there is an opportunity to change things. And in our parliamentary group in Renew Europe, well, used this crisis precisely to renew Europe at this difficult time. The COVID crisis allowed us to do unheard of things in Europe, such as, to buy, vaccines which saved a lot of life, create a European certificate that made it possible for people to travel freely. And we also, and this certificate was also very useful to Spain when the country opened up to tourism at the end of the crisis. And now we are, of course, working to defend the Ukraine against the invasion from Russia. We are helping them economically, and our group also supported the sanction packages imposed on Russia, and we will keep that initiative up. Now, facing up to the energy crisis was also a priority for our parliamentary group. This was all a result of the war on the Ukraine and and now it is very clear that Europe needs an urgent and ambitious plan to create a competitive, productive, innovative society. We need a European industry that is made in Europe, which should be constructed in a cross-cutting way, and new jobs should be created in the new industries with the energy transition in mind. And the last transition is the ecological transition, the green transition. Our group defended the main initiatives approved in the last few months in the European Parliament, which establish a very clear line, an unprecedented line for the future. European legislation on the climate is going to make it obligatory to reduce emissions by 55% until 2030. And the purpose, the real target is 2050 with zero emissions, climate neutrality. But that acceleration and that transition is really an important thing for our group. So it is also essential to defend our values, our liberal values. This is key for us. Fighting against populism. We are the most pro-European group in the Parliament. We defend the rule of law with tooth and nail, and we also have very important figures in Hungary with Katalin, who's here with us, and I want to congratulate her with all the work she's doing in her country, in Magyarország. She fights to defend individual liberties, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, sexual liberties, and also our own right to work for policies that guarantee economic growth. And to summarize, I just want to say that another pillar that I wanted to mention was our open strategic autonomy, which is what we like to call it, and the importance to strengthen trade agreements in a group. And I also mentioned this yesterday in a meeting we had in Madrid. I think that new trade agreements should be developed. We have a dynamic project. Adrian also mentioned it. We are here. I have come here to also support our party, Ciudadanos. I know that it is going through a difficult situation. There was a renewal of the party. We also renewed our party in France with Renaissance, the old En Marche, with a significant territorial and political reorganization. We started from scratch 4 or 5 months ago in France. So politics, is very has its ups and downs. In Germany, they also had problems, but I hope that the ups are going to be more than the downs. There's a lot we need to do in the European Parliament, and there's a lot of things that we're working on, and I am, of course, ready to answer all of your questions. Thank you.
Señor Séjourné.
Mr. Séjourné, yesterday, we had the president of the Committee of Regions here, Mr. Vasco Cordero, and he warned about the need to place the citizen at the center of European policy. And you mentioned some of the measures that have been approved during these parliamentary sessions in the European Parliament, thanks to the work of your parliamentary group. Are you satisfied? Or do you think that there are aspirations where the different political groups should make a bigger effort until the end of these parliamentary sessions so that there's not too many things left over? Yes, of course. The subject that we have at hand is the industrial aspect and competitiveness, and this is something that Renew gives a lot of importance to, and we are going to be making proposals in that respect. There are two complications, however. The first one is that the industry, especially German industry, which was a pulling force for most of our economic growth, well, the three characteristics, it had was that they had practically unlimited gas supplies, then quite cheap labor in the east of Europe, but of course in those areas salaries are going up, and China, which had a lot of money to buy things, and especially to do with cars. But those three factors are becoming unstable. Gas is not unlimited anymore, and it is becoming very expensive to produce electricity. Then we have a problem with the labor force because Europe, the whole of Europe, is now becoming integrated, and the price of labor is increasing in countries that used to be competitive, and China is becoming more closed. And this is a big challenge. The challenge is that there will be a competitivity clash. And also our allies, the United States, are also making the most of this opportunity to levy taxes on industries that are going to be creating the jobs of tomorrow. So we need a European response, and this is going to be the challenge of this year, above all the other policies, territorial, national, and European. And I think that my political group has a good answer to those problems. The good answer is precisely to, emphasize our competitiveness in terms of costs, a European policy and not just a national policy. Probably we will have a lot of debates about this topic. What can Europe do to help the Ukraine a little bit more? What should the European Union do to make sure that citizens do not become tired of the war and do not become disappointed about the war? Do you think that the Ukraine can win this war? Are you afraid of a nuclear escalation? And there's also a question on WhatsApp. Your country, France, well, at the beginning they wanted to lead the European position vis-à-vis the Ukraine, but now this seems to have disappeared a little. Well, it's too many questions, I think, but I will try to answer them. Well, first of all, the political capital that our biggest political capital in the European Parliament is unity. For the time being, the 27 countries were united. They were a bit different. There were a few differences, but we, in spite of the differences, managed to take concrete action to do, for example, with the contribution of money. Almost 50 million euros were contributed to the Ukraine with weapons and cash, and also, the sanctions packages. That is the most important political capital we have. Our colleagues from Ciudadanos know this very well. We spent a lot of time to try and convince skeptical political parties in the European Union so that the European support to the Ukraine was not hampered. And this is the main purpose for next year, to keep up this support and keep up this unity of Europe vis-à-vis the Ukraine. The second point is that the European Union is not at war, but war is being waged in the European territory, and this should I can't find my words in Spanish. This should make us excited about getting the support of the 27 member states, because democracy is also at stake. And the key issue in these debates is democracy and democratic values. That is the DNA of the European Union, and that is why the European Union was created after the war. And that is the reason why we have to fight and we need to support the Ukraine. The third point is that I don't think that, well, the war will end with victory of one party over the other. A negotiation will have to take place, and this has to be decided by Ukrainians. So today our role is to keep up the unity between the 27 countries, try and provide financial and military support to the Ukraine. There will be no problems. Russia will not attack the European Union. There is no problem about that, because we were very firm from the beginning of the war about our support. So I am not afraid of an escalation, a military escalation of the war, but I do think that if there is a rift in Europe, if we lose our unity our unity, that may be dangerous. So the role of the Euro parliamentarians here is to keep up this unit, and I think that that will be a big challenge in 2023. Would France like to have a greater protagonism in this conflict? Well, I am not the spokesperson of President Macron, but he made an effort to try and avoid the war at the beginning. He tried to prevent the war. He invested a lot of political capital. He had lots of contacts with Mr. Putin, trying to prevent an illegal invasion of Russia on the Ukraine. But we were not successful because the Kremlin kept telling lies. So now, of course, France is one of the countries helping the Ukraine, so it cannot have that role, that neutral role anymore. France cannot act as a mediator between Russia and the Ukraine because we have taken sides. We have taken sides with the attacked country. So the role of France now is to support the Ukraine. We have Mrs. Meloni as Italian Prime Minister, Mrs. Le Pen with a high representation in France, Mr. Orban with a great representation in Hungary. What do you have to say about the growth of extremism in Europe? What is Renew Europe going to do? Are you going to be more inclined to social democrats or to Christian democrats? Well, I believe in the political center. I really believe in the political center. And this is, I think, a democratic question. Bipartidanism is very comfortable for some people. For journalists, for example, because it's easy because there are two blocks. For trade unionists also, and for the blocks themselves, it's all very comfortable. But the Spanish configuration, which is very similar to Spain, is dangerous because it gives the role of a kingmaker to extremes in that configuration of going back to bipartidanism. Why? Well, because in a configuration where there are two political parties or two blocks and where the extremes have significant representation, then, the extreme parties are the kingmakers. They're the ones who decide who will rule the countries, and they have, power to impose their ideas on the configuration of governments after a general election. So the increase in the extreme right needs to be offset by a progressive center. In all the countries, we tried it in Italy with the Terzo, and we almost managed, just 4 points away. Melania was, she won the election by the skin of her teeth, because at the very last moment, 1.5 months before the elections, we configured a liberal center with a moderate right, with a moderate left. There was Calenda, Renzi, with a center configuration, and we were just about preventing Meloni from taking office. So we have to construct that center, because I think the majorities are made from the center downwards and not the other way around. Because if they are made from the extremes towards the center, then we will have problems in many countries. This is what happened in Italy, this is what may happen in France, and probably this is what may also happen in Spain. So that is the consequence of that rise of the extreme parties. Why do they rise? Well, probably because of the crisis and also probably because of us. We have failed to convey our message to society. Probably the middle class today feels isolated, paying taxes but not seeing anything in return for those taxes, thinking that people who pay their taxes every month, well, don't get anything in return. And this happens across the board in Europe. And that's why I insist to my colleagues in Ciudadanos that, they should be the political party of the middle class and of the political center for democratic reasons, for economic reasons, and for the good of the middle class. I think that we should form a center in many countries like Spain. Adriana Jordan is a colleague from the Spanish radio, and she says that surveys are predicting a very few number of votes for Ciudadanos. How does Renew see this? Another journalist says if the predictions of the surveys are right and Ciudadanos disappears from the Spanish Parliament, does that mean that in Spain in Europe there is less and less space for liberal formations? Well, we are here to avoid that, to prevent that. We are here to provide political support. And the question I answered before justifies that political support, because I think that our colleagues should be able to convince electors, should be able to convince a part of the electors who abstain, who do not want to vote, who feel abandoned by political parties. We should get our message to those people. My interest is that my group should, we can't afford not to have Spain. We can't afford not to have, we now have 25 nationalities. We can't afford to have only 24. And Spain is a very important country and we can't afford not to have a representation in Spain. The center is key for the industry, for energy, and particularly in renewable energy. So the third political group of the European Parliament needs to have a representation in Spain, and that is why the next regional and local elections are going to be very important in Spain, because we will see how things play out. In France and Spain, well, we have to also consider sub-Saharan Africa. Why do you think that the European Union has been left aside in Africa, and they seem to be embracing China? When do you think that European institutions are going to be able to get their act together? And what is going to happen in the next European elections if we can't reach, for example, a consensus in the area of migration, with so many people dying in the sea? Well, we need to come up with a consensus before the elections, because some people do not want a consensus and they don't want to come to a political agreement, because that is the fuel they need in order to agitate society before an election. This happens in France, it happens in Spain with Vox, and I think that significant the extreme right doesn't want for a political agreement to be reached, and this is an argument enough for us to have an argument and to have an agreement. And the basic words here are responsibility and solidarity, because the responsibility of making sure that asylum criteria, for example, are respected and unified in Europe across the different countries, also to, protect our European borders, following criteria that can easily be monitored, and also solidarity between the different member states, who are the ones who are on the first line and those who are not. That is a political agreement, and we need such an agreement as soon as possible. The PP is playing a game, a very strange game. During this period, the president of the group, my counterpart in the Popular Party in Europe, is adding things such as the building of a wall, using Trump-like vocabulary. And so I feel that they don't want an agreement either. So we are at a very difficult situation where my group is very reasonable, and I think we can come to an agreement based on the positions of my political group, but it will all depend on the political will of the other groups and on the political responsibility of other groups too. Clearly, what we see is that lives are lost. People die in the high seas. All of these immigrants, if you look at the figures, it's terrible. And of course, populists on the radio or on television say things that pander to people's instincts, but I know that my colleagues regularly visit the borders where those problems exist. When you go, so you realize that you need to resolve those problems, and we have it in our hand. We can do it at a European level. So I want to make a call to my colleagues of the PP party to be more reasonable. Europa Press, our colleague Alicia says, Morocco considers you to be the promoter of the resolution approved by the Euro Chamber, where you question the respect of human rights in Morocco. What do you think about these accusations, and what are the relationship like between France and Morocco? Well, I'm not going to say anything about the relationship between France and Morocco because, as you know, and you know this in France, diplomatic relations with I don't want to create difficulties for the French ambassador who is with us today. Well, I can understand that. Well, listen, let me go back to what I was saying at the beginning. I'm the president of a group of 103 parliamentarians from 25 nationalities. It's a group we always debate what our vote is going to be. We do it as a group, and we also vote internally before making a decision. So our position is not the position of France. It's a position of my political group. And I have no personal problem with Morocco. On the contrary, I think that we need to have very close ties with Morocco. But you need to be very careful with fake news, because my Europarliamentarians are also independent, and they vote whatever they like. Nobody tells them what to vote. And the European Parliament, we have Europarliamentarians who, in some countries, they have more votes than national representatives, because there was high participation in the 2019 election, 10 points more in some of the European countries. And I have colleagues in some countries which have a higher vote legitimacy than the national parliamentarians themselves. So you need to be careful with independence and of the votes of Europarliamentarians. Well, social conversations in Spain regarding pensions are creating a very difficult situation for Mr. Macron. Do you think we can have an efficient single market without European harmonization of social and fiscal policies. And afterwards, we will speak about fiscal harmonization, and I will tell you about a case we have in Spain. Yes, I know what you're going to be asking me about. Well, to talk about fiscal harmonization, obviously, and the reform of pensions, well, each country has its own different system with different rules, and generally they're also a result of trade union agreements and different political agreements in different contexts, and that makes a big difference. So to talk about convergence on pensions, well, in Spain we're having a political debate about raising the pension age to 64, from 62 to 64. And the French culture is different, and it's difficult to reach negotiations with the trade unions. And on the 7th of March, there will be a general strike because of that matter. But as much as we can do to make Europe bigger, as far as fiscal policies are concerned, is, that would be wonderful, because this would, make us more. But of course, so I would say that harmonization for fiscal matters should be encouraged, but for pensions, I think that it's more difficult, because, reform, it's more difficult to reform pensions, and it affects the daily lives of citizens more. And of course, we are always against raising taxes. No? As we were saying before, in the last few days, a construction company called Ferrovial has announced its intention to move its headquarters to the Netherlands, because they believe that the Netherlands offers more legal certainty to companies. And this has provoked criticism of the Spanish government, who has accused the company of every sin on earth. In Spain, in France, you also had controversy with the delocation of Gillette and the Polish plumber. Why do you think that the government is criminalizing a company for changing its headquarters to another European member state? Juan Casillas from ABC newspaper asks you, what do you think about the move of Ferrovial to the Netherlands, and do you think that this could set a precedent for other companies? Do you think that the government should do something about it? Some other journalist is asking you, Ferrovial is going to the Netherlands and the government is criticizing them. Do you think that the declaration of the ministers are favoring the situation of Europe in Europe? Well, I am afraid to answer this question. ABC is placing me in a difficult situation, because my first vice president in Renew, who's here today, Maria Sbagni, comes from the Netherlands. And my boss in the Spanish delegation, Adrian, and my vice president in the Ciudadanos delegation, Jordi, also are from Spain. So, whatever I say will have political implications within my own group. This is a national problem, a national matter. But of course, you can look at it from different points of view. Of course, the state, we also have the same debate in France, and in France there is huge opposition when a company decides to move its headquarters elsewhere. And of course it's that kind of debate is justified, and it is healthy to have that political debate as to, the maintenance of jobs in Spain, and trying to prevent companies from leaving. And the government, is accusing the Netherlands it's accusing the Netherlands of doing fiscal dumping. But I can't really express my own views because I don't want to have problems with the members of my group. Yes, you want to have a tranquil weekend. Okay, I can understand that. Fernando Carvajo from the Spanish Council of the European Movement is asking you why in France you haven't liberated the market of electrical distribution, which is a commitment that was taken 15 years ago. And this is an infringement, a flagrant infringement of European directives. And therefore, there is no energy interconnection in France. And this is in violation of European directives. And then France and Spain have had some conversations in the last few days regarding those interconnections. So, do you think that France is going to support interconnections of hydrogen and electrical interconnections? The H2 Med gas duct and the underwater gas duct in the Gulf of Biscay, do you think they will ever, you speak very good Spanish, but we know you're French, so we have to ask you these questions. Well, I'm the president of the Renew group, so I guess, but at the same time I am French. Okay, so I guess I must answer these questions. Well, first of all, to talk about the European energy market, there was a huge error in calculations of pricing, and we will have to revisit that. Because in the past I was saying that we had very cheap, unlimited gas from Russia, and the calculation for gas was made on the calculation for electricity was made on the last productive unit, on the basis of the last productive unit, basically gas plants producing energy. And that is why there was this link between the price of gas and the price of energy. But we need to go back to making a more effective calculation for our companies, for our consumers, so that that very expensive gas now, because we had to diversify our supply sources, so that that high price doesn't affect our companies and doesn't affect the competitiveness of our companies, and so that it doesn't affect purchasing capacity. That is the first thing we're going to do. So that is a very important reform of the European energy market. And I think that this answers the questions you were mentioning before about the different existing directives which France may be complying with or not, because I think that everything should be recalculated, and we should definitely reform our energy market. Here there is, well, in Spain there was a particular negotiation which took the Iberian Peninsula out of that calculation, but that is not viable either because, well, because the state has to inject significant subsidies. So in the long term, this is not really sustainable. So I am also including the Iberian Peninsula in this target, Spain and Portugal. Have I answered your questions? Well, has he answered the questions? Right, very well. Okay, everybody agrees. Somebody from the British Embassy is asking, in terms of the open strategic autonomy, how do you set the criteria to determine what trade partners are really reliable? Are you in favor of diversification in this respect? Well, opening up, yes, is very useful, especially in terms of international trade. I think that now some criteria need to be established, such, democratic criteria, because nowadays democracy is not part of the international trade. There's of course a lot of talk about the freedom of the press, and the rule of law, but all of those things are also important for foreign trade. So we will have to probably invent the trade agreements of the 21st century, including new elements which are also important for Europe and which are the DNA of Europe, particularly when there is a crisis such as the military crisis in the Ukraine. So if new things need to be implemented, they should be based on democratic values, and we should carefully choose the people we trade with. So this may be an important criteria also for public opinion, and I'm saying this also from the French perspective. And of course, trade agreements are not bad. If we include a democratic perspective, of course, trade agreements are not just economic agreements, they're also political agreements. And if you look at it from that perspective, I think you can convince the political opinion that you also need to talk to other countries and carefully choose the countries we talk to and we trade with. There are many people in Brussels who do not rule out that after the elections in 2024, there will be two candidates fighting for the European Commission presidency, both of them from the Popular Party, von der Leyen and Metsola from the right, from the center-right. Who would you prefer of the two? Well, is that a joke? Well, sometimes you also have to have fun, when not just all work and no play. Well, we are the third force in the European Parliament, so as president of the Renew group, I bring together prime ministers and heads of states of the Renew family. We have 8 prime ministers, 7 commissioners, 103 Europarlamentarians, and 25 nationalities. The third force in the European Parliament, and the PP and the Socialist Party need to understand that they don't have a majority anymore, and that is difficult for them because in the last 3 years I kept having to show, with votes that they were in the majority, because they come to agreements between them and then the agreement fails because there is no majority. They don't have a majority. So the question of this candidate to the presidency of the Commission, I think we are justified also to have our own candidate. So it's not just a question of one or the other. I'm going to propose to my political family to also have our own candidate for the also for the presidency of the Parliament, for the Council, and for all of these top jobs of the institutions, because we are the third force in the Parliament, and we are not the junior partner anymore. We are not the junior partner or the minion of 2 political parties that, yes, they had a lot of glory in the past, and they also had all the privileges and seized all the good positions for many years, but that is over. They need to understand it. They need to come to terms with it. So my answer, of course, is that we will speak about our own candidates. We have talked about different countries, where the relations with Africa, also about, we made a reference to the United States, but we didn't speak about China. Alvaro Perigas from SW Spain says that As a company associated to the as a company devoted to professional services in Asia, we are worried about the relationship, the trade relationships between the United States and China. Well, we need to talk to China. The relationship between Europe and China. Well, we need to talk to China because as a group, as a collective, as a European Union, we need to not different, each country talk to China separately. We need to have a single voice when talking to China because our markets, of course, individually are too small. But Europe together, can be a rival of China. But of course, if you compare Spain with China or France with China, we are very small. So it's important to talk to them as a group, as a collective European Union. And French president always, whenever he travels to China, he always takes the president of the Commission or at least a representation from the Commission. I think that is a good method to go about it, but there is a trend that each government, each state to come to its own agreement with China, but that is a mistake. So what we should do is speak to them with a single voice, all 27 of us. And then the second thing has to do with what I was saying before about democracy and about the rule of law. We are going to also have to talk about that with China. That is also part of our conversation with China. So we shouldn't leave things out of the conversations with the Chinese government. We should talk about everything under the sun, even about the things that they don't want to talk about. Santiago Gonzalez from the Justicia Fiscal platform says the European Union needs to pay for the new generation credits. Is Renew in favor of levying a transactions tax for all European Union countries? And then there is another question. What do you think about the criticism of the European Union of the Spanish law that reduces the sentences for corruption? Well, let me see. Well, first of all, I want to say that this is a debate, an interesting debate. Crises come and go, and there's always a debate between the groups in terms of knowing what economic response should be given. And when we find the right economic response, we need to see how we channel it. I don't know whether I'm using the right word. What type of pipeline should we use? For the time being, to answer your second question, for the time being, we have decided that the industrial response to the United States, particularly in the context that we are talking about, is going to be given with the money we already have. So all this question of fresh money, well, are we going to try and get more money or not? Well, for the time being, there is enough money. There is a lot of money that has not been executed. A lot of money has not been executed, and Spain should be very careful with this because crises come and go. I don't know whether next year we may have the need for another recovery plan, for a new crisis that we still don't know. But when a budget is not fully executed, the tendency of the Commission and of the Parliament will be to get that money back, the unused money, so that everybody else can spend it. So my response would be, there is a lot of money, in European money, that has not been executed, and we need to use that money before we provide further loans. Jacobo Gonzalez asks you, how can a nationalist and and a breakaway party like PNV from the Basque Country, belong to Ciudadanos. Well, Ciudadanos is a progressive party, and PNV is a nationalistic liberal party that is also part of our group. We have this, and we have the same issue in Germany. Almost half of the group there's 2 or 3 parties, sometimes 4 parties in the same political group. And that is no problem for us. We have that situation with many countries, so you will have to ask our colleagues from Ciudadanos. But as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't create any problems for me. Ciudadanos is, you should ask Ciudadanos. There is another question. We're about to finish. About Ciudadanos, what do you think, what mistakes do you think Ciudadanos made in order, well, to justify its current situation? Well, I'm not going to rate Ciudadanos at this meeting. That is not for me to say. The only advice I can give them is that you should talk to the people who do not feel represented by the current political parties, and there are many people who do not feel represented by the Socialist or the Socialist Party or the PP. And also, we have a political culture based on responsibility, and I know my colleagues in Ciudadanos have the same culture. And and I know they will, do their job very well in the future. So my advice is to talk to these people and take on their responsibilities when they are required. Europe has temporarily suspended its economic help to Poland and Hungary until they respect the rule of law. In Spain, the disciplinary committee of the judiciary is integrated by 3 ministers and the Spanish prosecutor. So in Spain, the state can interfere in the judiciary system. And do you think that this violates the rule of law? Well, I'm not an expert in the legal system of Spain, so I can't really give you my opinion. But the Liberal group, I can tell you, in the Liberal group, the question of the independence of the judiciary is at the heart of the DNA of our group. All the parties in my group believe that very firmly. So it is Ciudadanos that should take a political stance about that issue. But I think that the independence of the judiciary should be defended with tooth and nail. I think that this is something that we have defended in Hungary, in Poland. We have fought so that money is not given to those countries, so as to pressure them into making the needs that are so necessary in those countries. So we're doing this for things to change. So we're doing this to pressure those countries into changing. And we need to protect those powers and those freedoms that we have. In a few days in Spain, we will have Patricia, president of Ciudadanos, and we will keep talking about those matters, but from the Spanish perspective. I have one last question for you. Do you have the mandate to transform the Renaissance movement in France into a solid party that survives after the second administration of President Macron, who was the founder of the movement? But of course, government wears a political party out. How do you think you can survive without Mr. Macron? How, in a short period of time, how do you think you can develop a charismatic leader that can replace Mr. Macron? How do you think you will be able to achieve a good result in the European elections of 2024 that may be, conducive to a good election in France in 2025 for your party? Well, I am, like Ciudadanos, I am building in France a political party which is democratic, which elects its representatives, which has roots in the different territories and which has territorial autonomy. And for a French person, the concept of autonomy, of territorial autonomy, is very important. And so, for two reasons. First of all, and the French president said it, he cannot stand for election more than twice, constitutionally speaking. But French politics, I remember in 2015 or 2016, Emmanuel Macron, was a nobody in French politics. But less than 2 years later, he was elected president when he was 39 years old. I think that we did a good job at that time because the risk was to have Mélenchon and Le Pen in the second round. And the French president, Mr. Hollande, and corruption cases of the right meant that that election would be a failure if there was no if a different political proposal was not made, and that prevented the extreme right wing from taking power. So I'm very proud of what happened then. And now, of course, what we're doing is trying to build a strong party, and we need to see who can be president of the French Republic. But we have 4 years to decide that, and I'm sure that we will. But can you see yourself as a candidate? No. No. To be president of the French Republic, you need to have something more, something extra. Well, a few years ago, when he was minister, nobody thought that Mr. Macron would become president of the French Republic. So you never know. You never know. Well, I don't know about that. Okay. Before I give you one last chance to say a few words by way of farewell, I will ask Mr. Ortiz from Assisa Health Insurance Company and on behalf of Solaria Energy Company to say a few words. Hello, good morning. I just want to congratulate Marianne and Mr. Séjourné for his presentation, for his clarity, and for his humor, and also for his position vis-à-vis very important and critical matters such as migration and the war on the Ukraine. And that is all. Congratulations, and I wish you very well, and I wish you become the next Mr. Macron. Thank you.
Adelante.
Well, I will be very brief. In the history of Europe after the Second World War, we never lived such hectic years as the last 3 years. Having to renew ourselves once and over again, finding solutions with the pandemic, the war on the Ukraine, which is still raging. And I think, and I also tried to show this to you, that my political group has part of the answers to this question. A political party never has all the answers, but there's 50 political parties in my group, and I think that this is a magical combination that can really provide a good government for Europe. And as president of the Renew Parliamentary Group, my mission is to, in 5, 6, or 7 years, that we should become the second group in the European Parliament, that we should have leaders in the institutions that can also rule Europe, and that we can convince society that our group, which is the most pro-European group of the European Parliament, should have enough responsibilities to also convince citizens, Spanish, French, German, etc., that they can trust us. And the word trust is very important. I think that politically speaking, this is what politicians want, to be trusted. Trust in the markets, trust in politicians. So the most important thing is trust, but to develop trust, you need people like the ones in this room from Ciudadanos, because I know for sure that they're not here because of their personal ambition, but because of their political convictions. Thank you.